In my last video, we talked a little bit about coping mechanisms. So for some of us, we won't actually get PTSD, but the reason why we're not getting PTSD is because it's not because we have actually processed things correctly, but it's actually because we've developed coping mechanisms such as apathy, distractions, or anger that can enable us to not deal with our traumatic past, but instead move past it. But unfortunately, while it will protect us from PTSD and other negative side effects, it will in and of itself have negative side effects that are very damaging, and in some cases, these side effects could be just as bad, if not worse, than PTSD itself. So in future videos, I am going to talk a little bit more about how those coping mechanisms can affect us, and then later in future videos, we're going to talk more and more about the healing process. But before we get there, I did want to quickly mention something in this video. And that is that if you listen to my last video, you might get a false idea. You might say like, oh, okay, so refusing to process something or suppressing some sort of a traumatic event inside of my life is going to lead to all these negative side effects, all these negative coping mechanisms, so best just get it over with. Let's dig into those memories right now. Let's sit down with some therapists and allow them to just start digging into my past until I'm all cured. This type of therapy is called immersion therapy or flooding. And unfortunately, immersion therapy and flooding can have some very negative side effects. So for a very small percentage of people, this will be successful. But for a much larger percentage of people, this won't be successful and will actually mess you up more than you were before. Really simple example of this is to look at people who have phobias, right? So if I have someone who has a fear of elevators or something like that, someone who does immersion therapy would say, okay, well, let's go to the top of the Empire State Building, let's ride that elevator all the way up, and the entire way up I'm going to jump up and down, I'm going to make as much racket and noise as I possibly can, I'm going to stop the elevator randomly, I'm going to make you face all of your worst fears in the same second, and you're going to get over it, right? Now that might sound good, that's a type of immersion therapy or flooding, but if it doesn't work, what's going to happen is that person's going to become more screwed up than they were before. Now they have a more vibrant and real reason to be afraid of elevators because you just traumatized them, and now they have to deal with that traumatic memory of your attempted therapy session as well as their already ingrained fear of elevators. For most therapists, what they'll do if they're dealing with someone who has a fear of elevators or any other type of phobia is they'll do instead a gradual process to enable someone to deal with their fears and their anxieties over the different phobias that they have. So for instance, if I have someone who's a phobia of elevators, I wouldn't take them to the Empire State Building, but I might take them to a 2-story building and say, hey, you know, you can't get into an elevator, but maybe you can stand in front of one. Could you do that? Right? And they'll be like, yeah, I think I could do that. And they would go and they would stand in front of an elevator, and then I would walk them through their feelings. Hey, what are you feeling right now? And they'd be like, yeah, I'm feeling very anxious right now. I'm feeling very stressed out. And I would say, why are you feeling that way? And then they would walk me through exactly what they're feeling, exactly why they're feeling it. And what they're learning how to do in those moments is they're learning how to calibrate their fears. They're learning how to control them. And even though they're still feeling that anxiety, they're learning that it's not the end of the world. They're learning that, okay, I can handle this. And it makes them feel more in control. So the next time I would take them to an elevator and say, hey, can you push the door open button? They'd be like, yeah, I think I could do that. And the next time I would take them in front of an elevator, it'd be like, okay, can you stand in the elevator even though I'm not going to let the doors close? They'd be like, okay, I think I can do that. And then the next time it would be like, okay, let's actually ride the elevator up a story, right? And we would keep going and going and going until maybe at the end of it, maybe I'd be like, let's go to the Empire State Building, ride that thing all the way up and down, just so you see that you've done the work and that you've processed this and it's okay now, right? So even though the entire way up and down they're going to be feeling that anxiety, they know that they can handle it, they feel in control, they're able to function even in the midst of their fear, right? That's a process, right? That's something that takes a very, very long time, which is why people in our country don't tend to like it. We live in a culture of instant gratification. We don't like things that take time. We want a pill, we want a solution, we want it now. We don't want to wait. Unfortunately, with trauma, it's even more complex than dealing with someone who has a phobia. Right? You cannot just sit down with a therapist and have them flood you. You cannot just sit down and say, okay, I'm going to dig into every negative memory of my past and expect it not to mess you up, right? In fact, what it might end up doing to you is it might end up making things worse, which is another reason why some people have their symptoms of PTSD get worse over time. It's because instead of processing their memory, they're instead doing something that we call ruminating. Now, what's ruminating? The easiest way, I think, for people to understand this term is if you think about anger. So think about the last time you got into a fight with your boss, your spouse, something like that.
And after that fight, what you probably did is you probably sat in your car or you sat in your room and you sulked. And during that time where you were sulking, you rolled that fight over in your mind again. But this time you were thinking about, I wish I would have said this, I wish I would have said that, man, I hate this person. You start thinking about how horrible that person is and how much you want to hurt them or how much you want to tell them off in front of everybody. And what this is doing to you is it's not making your anger better. You're not processing your anger and becoming less bitter. You're actually becoming more angry. You're becoming more violent. You're becoming more aggressive. You're becoming more enraged at this person. The reason why is because, again, you're not processing your anger. You are inflaming it, right, through this process of ruminating. The same thing can be true with other emotions, right? So if you sit down and you just start digging into your memory, you might not actually be processing your trauma. You might be ruminating on it, meaning that you're rolling it over in your mind and you're making it more clear, more vivid, more oppressive to you, right? Some therapists who are more bullheaded, they'll do this to their patients. They'll sit down with them, they'll try to flood them with their memories, and not only do sometimes it doesn't work and it actually traumatizes the patient, just simply that therapy session will re-traumatize them, but it actually might create trauma that wasn't there before, right? So they'll sit down with them and they'll talk to them about their relationship with their parents and be like, man, that must have been really horrible for you. That must have been traumatizing. And by saying these words, they're actually creating the very trauma that they're trying to avoid with this person. So they're making this person far, far worse. So if you have a therapist like this, find a new one. That's not a good therapist. You need to find someone who's going to be more gradual with you, right? And again, we'll talk way more about this in the future, but just understand that this process takes a long time. It takes a lot of diligence and perseverance, and those are all very good things that are going to help you in your life anyway. That also being said, also understand that even after you go through this process, these memories will still have somewhat of a hold on you. They're always going to be flagged in your mind as something that is dangerous or offensive. But what you'll learn is almost like that person with the elevator, is you'll learn how to control that fear in the moment. You'll learn how to be triggered but not respond. You'll learn how to go into your anxiety but not react. And that's the goal. You're going to learn how to cope with it. In very rare cases, people are totally healed from their trauma. They don't have any more triggers, they don't have any more responses, but that is the exception, it's not the rule. It happens, and it's awesome when it happens, but it doesn't happen for everybody. So if it doesn't happen for you, don't be discouraged by that. Just be prepared to go through this long process. I will mention very quickly that there are certain types of mental illnesses and disorders that can make this much, much more difficult. Certain people who have anxiety disorders, or specifically the one that I'm thinking of right now is obsessive compulsive disorder, this process will be much more difficult. The reason why is because people with obsessive compulsive disorder and other anxiety disorders are far more likely to ruminate, meaning when a thought enters their mind, it's very difficult for them to let it go. It's very difficult for them to distract themselves or to think about something different. That thought will take over their mind and they'll stress about it. They'll roll it over and over again in their mind. They can't stop, right? And it can become worse and worse and worse the more that they do it. So for people with these type of disorders, or if you just realize you struggle with it, you might not have a disorder. This is just something that you do. Whenever you get stressed out or fearful, you overanalyze everything. You just can't let things go. If this is something you realize that is an issue in your life, you need to learn how to deal with this, right? There are different methods and techniques that you can learn in order to help you distract yourself, in order to get your mind off of these things. I know in my last video I said it's not good to distract yourself, but what I was talking about in my last video is it's not good to distract yourself from the trauma altogether. Sometimes it is good to give yourself a little bit of a distraction, right? When the memory is becoming too overpowering for you, the emotions becoming too overwhelming for you, it's good sometimes to take a break, to be like, okay, I don't want to think about this right now. It's too intense. Maybe I need to take a walk. Maybe I need to go watch a movie. Maybe I need to hang out with this person. I need to do something to get my mind off it. I'll come back to it later. I'll journal about it later. I'll talk to my therapist about it later. But right now, it's way too intense for me. So it's okay to take breaks. It's okay to distract yourself. You don't have to get this done overnight. This is something that is going to be taking months, if not years. It takes years for a lot of people to fully process these things. And don't be discouraged by this. Don't be discouraged when you have triggering events, right? That's not a bad thing. That's a part of the process. And don't be discouraged if you take some steps backwards in your healing process. That's, once again, that's a part of it, right? But just keep on moving forward, and know that, again, healing is very possible. And we'll talk much more about that in future videos. So look forward to that.